For decades, agricultural extension relied on face-to-face visits, field schools, and physical demonstrations. Today, that model shifted to social media broadcasting, where one extension worker instantaneously reaches thousands of farmers. But these networks can rapidly turn hostile. State institutions often embrace these platforms, assuming they are neutral tools for knowledge transfer. This ignores how platforms operate. Social media algorithms prioritize engagement through affordances like anonymity and virality, which actively amplify antisocial behavior and hostility. A clear example of this vulnerability occurred during the Vietnamese coconut tree project in Bangladesh. This was a state-led initiative that utilized social media to heavily promote a high-yield dwarf hybrid coconut variety to local farmers. Driven by a desire for rapid online engagement and fast diffusion, the project completely bypassed standard agricultural procedures. Standard multi-location trials and rigorous applied research were skipped to get the message onto digital feeds as quickly as possible. The consequences were severe. An agroecological mismatch resulted in disappointing yields and widespread crop failures. The exact same digital platforms that enabled the project's swift initial adoption immediately became channels for a concentrated, intense digital backlash against the extension workers who promoted it. Platforms adopted with the intent to democratize agricultural knowledge instead functioned as frictionless conduits for mass public hostility, aggressively delegitimizing the institutions involved. The abuse directed at these workers is frequently dismissed by their employers as an unavoidable hazard of the internet, a problem of individual friction. The evidence indicates it is actually a predictable structural failure driven by specific ecosystem conditions. This causal flowchart maps exactly how that failure happens. Based on research analyzing thousands of online interactions, it illustrates a distinct linear breakdown of the digital advisory system. By tracking this model from left to right, we can trace how baseline environmental stressors mutate into acute psychological strain, which then forces workers into professional withdrawal, ultimately triggering a total collapse of the knowledge ecosystem. Mapping this strain cascade is vital. Without understanding the mechanics of this collapse, policymakers cannot prevent verified knowledge networks from degrading into vacuums of misinformation. The collapse begins here, in column 1, with the baseline inputs triggering the system. The most visible stressor is box A, direct digital hostility from the public. This chart categorizes the specific elements of antisocial behavior measured in the study. The hostility is not uniform. It ranges from general toxicity and incivility to severe profanity and intense personal aggression. Crucially, the data shows public anger regarding a failed policy frequently escalates past the policy itself. Users routinely cross the line into identity attacks based on identity and issue explicit threats intending to inflict pain or injury. The second input compounds this danger. Box B represents institutional and organizational pressure. Employers issue top-down directives mandating that workers maintain high digital visibility, but provide zero logistical support or online safety protocols to protect them. Finally, Box C introduces information disorder. Agricultural content is highly commercialized. Market actors monetize sensational misinformation, deliberately blurring the boundary between objective science-based extension advice and aggressive product promotion. These three inputs, unfiltered public hostility, unguided institutional mandates, and commercialized digital noise, interact simultaneously. Together, they create an actively hostile working environment from which the extension officer cannot easily escape. The intensity of this environment is explained by psychologist John Suller's online disinhibition effect. Digital anonymity and a perceived lack of consequences multiply historical distrust of state expertise, resulting in behavior users would rarely attempt face-to-face. As the flowchart shows, these external inputs do not bounce off the workers. They travel along the driving pathways directly into column 2, manifesting as 3 specific forms of acute internal strain. Workers experience a breakdown in communication norms and trust. They suffer severe psychological strain, reporting fear, distress, and demoralization. And they face profound professional integrity strain as their ethical convictions clash with forced compliance. Herzberg's two-factor theory explains why this combination of strains is so destructive. In workforce psychology, hygiene factors like salary keep an employee on the job, while motivators like respect and purpose actually drive performance. Top-down mandates force the extension workers to remain online and visible, But the constant barrage of digital hostility systematically strips away intrinsic motivators, eliminating the psychological rewards necessary to work. The worker is not simply annoyed by internet trolls. They are experiencing a structural demoralization and a crisis of professional integrity. That internal crisis demands an immediate behavioral response. Column 3 outlines how workers route that psychological strain into action, diverging into two very different behavioral paths. Box G represents a minority path of adaptive practices. A small segment of workers successfully employs de-escalation strategies, simplifying their language and tailoring their messaging to navigate the hostility. But the vast majority are forced into Box H, risk management behaviors. Unable to change the environment, workers actively suppress their own output to minimize their exposure to attack. In practice, this means strict self-censorship. Workers drastically reduce visibility and withdraw entirely from sharing innovative agricultural practices, resorting to a strict routine-only orientation. This creates a hidden, dangerous mechanic in the ecosystem. Notice the dotted line traveling backward. These risk management behaviors create a negative feedback loop, actively worsening communication strain and exacerbating the worker's ethical discomfort. Suppressing expertise is deeply frustrating for these professionals, but self-censorship is not a failure of courage. In an unmoderated, highly toxic digital ecosystem, silence is the only viable survival strategy. When experts adopt silence as a survival strategy, the network degrades. Column 4 maps the immediate outcomes. The volume of scientific knowledge sharing plummets, stakeholder engagement weakens, and the ability to respond to farming crises slows to a crawl. This leads into the final stage, revealing the ultimate paradox. Platforms were adopted to build institutional trust. Instead, the resulting hostility causes a long-term erosion of trust in extension institutions themselves, completely destroying the culture of innovation. The final result is displacement. Silencing verified experts creates a massive knowledge vacuum. That void is instantaneously filled by unverified commercial actors and monetized misinformation. Driving legitimate experts out of a digital space doesn't end the conversation. It simply hands a monopoly to bad actors operating without any ethical constraints. The common institutional response to this crisis is to tell extension workers to simply develop a thicker skin. But relying on individual resilience to fix a structural defect is a guaranteed path to failure. The study identifies mandatory structural safeguards along the bottom row. These protective factors push mitigating effects upward to stabilize the system. They include digital training and critical top-down safeguards like strict platform moderation, clear guidelines, and highly visible leadership backing. Digital agriculture holds incredible potential as a tool for global development, but it will not moderate itself. It must be actively protected. If institutions mandate digital engagement but fail to protect the communicators, the entire scientific supply chain breaks down. We will leave vulnerable agricultural networks to face a rapidly changing climate, armed with nothing but misinformation.